The Chernobyl series depicts the April 26, 1986 incident of a massive explosion of nuclear power in Ukraine that spread radioactive material throughout Belarus, Russia, and Ukraine, and even to the Scandinavian and Western European foothills. The author and creator of the series is Craig Mazin, and its director is Johan Renck. Chernobyl is a joint production of the American network HBO and the British television network Sky. The series premiered on May 6, 2019 in the United States and on May 7, 2019 in the United Kingdom, and ended on June 3, 2019. The series depicts the Chernobyl nuclear disaster in April 1986 in the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic and the unprecedented cleansing efforts that followed. Subscribe our YouTube channel to watch the rest of this video and more. Chernobyl is the true story of a human catastrophe in history and tells the story of the courage of men and women who sacrificed themselves to save Europe from it. This short series focuses on the Chernobyl nuclear power plant disaster that occurred in Ukraine in April 1986 and reveals why and how it happened, and points to Soviet secrecy. This short series is based on the memories of the local people of Pripyat, said Svetoslav Alekseyevich, the Belarusian author of the Nobel Prize-winning book The Voices of Chernobyl. Chernobyl is a city in Ukraine located in Kyiv Oblast, the capital of Ukraine near the border with Belarus. The city was evacuated due to the Chernobyl accident at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant, located 14 kilometers from the city. The Chernobyl nuclear accident has been named the worst civilian nuclear accident in world history. Most of us have heard about the Chernobyl accident, April 26, 1986 at 1:24 a.m. Rainbow flames reached a peak of 1,000 meters in the Ukrainian sky. The fourth reactor at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant exploded. It was a sign that the Battle of Chernobyl had begun. For 8 months, 800,000 young soldiers, miners, and even ordinary citizens from all over the Soviet Union struggled to control the radiation, build stone tombs around the destroyed reactor, and most importantly, save the world from another explosion. The secondary nuclear explosion caused by terrible chain reactions, 10 times stronger than Hiroshima, threatened at any moment to wipe out not only the whole of Ukraine but half of Europe. A race against time that has the first participants in Chernobyl battle will never forget. Europe was on brink of disaster. It is the most costly event in history, costing over $200 billion. On April 25 and 26, 1986, reactor operators disabled the reactor's safety system for a test run. The result was a reactor without a proper retarder and out of control. Without the ability to control the reactor, its temperature reached a point where it was projected to exceed the output heat. The accident began when at 10 p.m. on April 25, the Chernobyl plant received orders to reduce the reactor power for testing, and the plant began to reduce reactor power by 4 to 30%. Two mistakes marked the fatal Chernobyl accident. The first mistake was when the reactor controller mistakenly reduced the reactor power by 1% due to misalignment of the neutron absorption rods, causing the reactor to lose more power than before. It was here that personnel made their second mistake and pulled almost all the control rods out of the reactor. This is like when a car both bites and brakes at the same time. At this time, despite the lack of power control rods inside the active area, the reactor power increased to 7%. At 1:24 a.m., an initial explosion lifted the 1,000-ton cover above the reactor, paving the way for large amounts of hot water vapor to escape, a prelude to second hydrogen-induced explosion, which may be the result of combination of water vapor from ruptured pipes and zirconium, or even graphite in the reactor core. The second blast tore the reactor roof and destroyed 25% of the reactor core facility. The burning graphite and core heat emitted by the explosion caused about 30 new fires, including the bituminous and flammable roof of Unit 3, which was adjacent to Unit 4. Within hours, a large number of facility staff showed signs of radioactive radiation. Many of the unarmed firefighters were mostly due to the fire on the roof of Unit 3, which ignored safety precautions. The number of people admitted to hospitals reached 108 by 6 a.m. and 132 by the end of the first day. After the explosion, the environment around the facility was first contaminated with radioactive waves, and then gradually the contaminated clouds spread to more distant areas, and rain caused large parts of Europe to be contaminated with radioactive material. An explosion at the reactor block of 4 Chernobyl nuclear facilities released radioactive material to make about 100 atomic bombs. Although in that year the authorities of the former Soviet Union strictly forbade the broadcast of any news about this catastrophe, in comparison to human societies, the Chernobyl is the most terrible man-made technological catastrophe in all history. The aftermath of the Chernobyl disaster began on April 27, 1986, under the chairmanship of the Soviet State Commission. The operation began in the second half on April 30 and continued until 1991. In the first step, an isolation zone was identified within 30 kilometers of the Chernobyl power plant. As of April 27, 1986, the Ukrainian government had relocated residents of the towns of Pripyat and Chernobyl, as well as villages within a 30 kilometers area. Hiding information about the Chernobyl disaster led to spread of incredible rumors about the consequences of the disaster. The Soviet presidency refused to accept international cooperation to carry out operations to eliminate the consequences of the other nuclear disaster. It was not until 1989 that the Soviet government requested assistance from the Atomic Energy Agency to assess the expertise of the demolition operation. The Chernobyl disaster dramatically changed the state of radiation in many parts of Europe, as seen in May 1986 in all countries of the Southern Hemisphere in the Pacific, Atlantic, and Arctic Oceans. No one knows exactly how much of the 180 tons of available nuclear fuel entered the atmosphere as a result of the explosion. 25 years after the catastrophe, some 9 million people live in Chernobyl-contaminated areas, and British experts predict that another 66,000 will die of cancer caused by the explosion of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. They will die in the coming years, which is 15 times the UN forecast. The effects of the Chernobyl accident on the health of people who were exposed to radioactive radiation were great. At least 1,800 cases of pediatric thyroid cancer were reported among young people aged 0 to 14 years. This rate of thyroid cancer is much higher than normal. The thyroid gland in children strongly be affected by the radioactive rays of the element. This makes it easy for cancer to start in children and can be treated with both surgery and medication. Health studies of workers cleaning the reactor have shown a direct link between exposure to radiation and the incidence of cancer. The psychological effects of the Chernobyl accident not only hidden but still continue. Many suicides took place immediately after the incidents, and many people became addicted to alcohol and depression increased. More than 100 radioactive elements also entered the area after the Chernobyl explosion. Of course, most of these elements had a short half-life and soon lost their radioactivity. Iodine, strontium, and cesium were the most dangerous elements released, with half-lives of 8 days, 29 years, and 30 years, respectively. Just as iodine causes thyroid cancer, strontium can cause leukemia. Cesium was also the most dispersed element, and most of it remains in nature. This element affects the rest of the body and disrupts the work of the liver and spleen. But how did they clean up the area after the accident? Rescue workers immediately set to work clearing the area and the power plant. Most of these workers were employees of Ukrainian power plants and fire stations, as well as Russian, Belarusian, Ukrainian, and other miners from other parts of the Soviet Union. The exact number of rescuers is not known because many people were involved in the cleanup. Russia registered about 400,000 workers, of whom 600,000 worked as day laborers. Special services were provided for these individuals as those who had participated in the cleansing. The duties of these workers were different. They worked on buildings and cities, they helped people who had to be evacuated, they were constructing water treatment systems, garbage cans, and so on. And their most important task was to make a cover for Part 4 of the power plant to keep the radioactive elements there and prevent them from becoming radioactive. Something happened to the animals and the environment after the accident. Genetic mutations occurred in plants and animals, the shape of the leaves changed, and birth defects were born. Despite the increase in radiation in the area after the accident, some animals still live there. Deer, wolves, hogs, and some birds are still present in the area. How are the old inhabitants of the Chernobyl now? 187 small group of people now live in the no-go area. A small number of residents have asked to return to the area, but children have not been allowed to live in there. Most of the people who migrated live in newly built cities, and after more than 25 years after the Chernobyl accident, Chernobyl seems like a ghost town. The mini-series that was created from this incident was a great success. At the 71st Emmy Awards, Chernobyl won 10 awards in various categories, including Best Miniseries, Best TV Director, and Best Screenplay. The critics also had good feedback from this series. Rotten Tomatoes reported that 90% of the critics had a positive opinion about the series, which is based on 56 reviews, giving the series a total score of 8.84 out of 10. The IMDb site also gave the series a score of 9.4.